All right, so in this lesson, what we're going to be doing is getting the equation of a line. So if I've given you the graph, now you have to be able to come up with the equation. Or if I've given you certain pieces of information, you need to be able to come up with the equation. And you want to remember that your equations are in the form y equals mx plus b, and m is the slope, and b is the y-intercept. And those are the two things you need to be able to figure out the equation. So once you know those two things, you should be able to get the equation. So the easiest possible question would be me giving you what the slope is and what the y-intercept is. So that's the table on the left. So if I tell you that the slope is 2/3 and the y-intercept is -1, you can just substitute the 2/3 into the slope and substitute the -1 into the y-intercept. So you're going to write this as y equals 2/3x minus 1. So this is the slope, and it goes in for the m. This is the y-intercept, and it goes in for the b. So the next one is y equals -1x plus 4, or you can just write that as -x plus 4. So you could write this as y equals -3x plus 0, but for communication, we're not going to, For communication, we're not going to write the 0. So we can write y equals 0x plus 3. So whenever there's a 0, you don't have to write that. So you don't change that to y equals x plus 3, because that means that that coefficient of x would be 1 instead of 0. So that would actually be y equals 3. All right, so the 3 up here would be knowledge types of questions. So again, the easiest one would be if I gave you the slope and the y-intercept. The next one would be if I gave you a graph, because it's relatively easy enough to figure out what the graph is. So to start with, you can tell exactly where the y-intercept is. So the y-intercept is at -2. All right, so to get the slope, you can calculate the rise and the run. So the rise here is 5, and the run here is 3. Remember to take the direction of the line into consideration. If the line is decreasing, like the next one, your rise is negative. So in this case, your rise is 5 and your run is 3, so your slope is 5/3, which means your equation is y equals 5/3x minus 2. So in the last example, the y-intercept is 3, so that's the b. And to get the slope, you got to figure out the rise and the run, and because the line is decreasing, your slope is going to be negative. So your rise is actually going to be -1, and your run is going to be 4. So your slope is going to be negative 1/4. So that makes the equation y equals negative 1/4 x plus 3. And to fill in this table, to find the equation of the line, you must know the slope, which is the m, and the y-intercept, which is b. And the equation formula is y equals mx plus b. Now, not all the questions are going to be as easy as the ones at the beginning where you can relatively easily, I don't want to say easy because it's not easy for everybody, but it's a little bit simpler to figure out what the slope and the y-intercept are. In some questions, you will not know what the slope is, but luckily, we have a slope formula. Do you remember the slope formula? If you don't know the slope, you use the slope formula. So that's y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. So if you don't know the slope, you can use the slope formula. If you don't know the y-intercept, what we can do is we can substitute the slope in for m, and then what would happen is that we would be given another point on the line, and you would substitute that in for x and y, and then you would solve for b. And that's what we're going to start with first. So the first part is I'm going to give you the slope, and I'm going to show you how to find the y-intercept. So these two questions, I will show you the slope, but I'm not telling you what the y-intercept is. What I am telling you is that it passes through the point 1, 6. That's not the y-intercept. So let's take a look at this. If we know the slope is 5, so we're going to substitute the slope of 5 in for the m, which is right there. The 5 goes in for the m. If you don't know what the y-intercept is, you have to be given another point. So that's what this point is. This point is 1, 6. So if you don't know what the y-intercept is, you have to be given another point. This will get substituted in for the x, because remember the first coordinate is the x, and this will get substituted in for the y because the second coordinate is the y. So 1 gets substituted in for the x, and 6 gets substituted in for the y. So instead of y, you're going to put 6 here. Instead of m, you're going to put 5 here. Instead of x, you're going to put 1 here. And then the only thing we don't know is b, so you're going to leave b the way it is. So the 6 goes in for the y, the 1 goes in for the x, and the 5 goes in for the m. So just to remind you where those numbers came from, this is the y equals m x plus b. So b is the only thing we don't know, so that's the only thing you can't substitute in. Now the next thing we do is solve this equation for b. All right, so the first step is to take the 5 and multiply it by 1, and that gives you 5 plus b. Now sometimes that will give you a fraction. You either use your fraction skills in your brain or you use your fraction button on your calculator. So now this is just like solving an equation. To isolate b, we're going to subtract 5 from both sides. So that means b is equal to 1. And now you are able to write out your handy-dandy equation. Y equals, the slope is 5, x, and the y-intercept is 1. And what I want you to remember when you write out your final equation, the x and the y should be letters. And the slope m and the y-intercept b should be numbers. And I say this, don't write this down, and I say this because some people, when they write down the final answer, they put all the numbers in. So they say 6 equals 5 times 1 plus 1. So they put that x and the y into the equation as well. But that 6 and 1 was only one possible point. You have to leave the x and the y as x and y so that other points could possibly be substituted in when using a table of values. So the slope is -2 over 5. So we do not know the value of b. So when we don't know the value of b, you have to be given another point so that you can substitute those in for x and y. So the x gets substituted in for 7, and the y gets substituted in for 1, and the slope gets substituted in for -2 over 5. So at this point, what you do is you substitute in all the numbers except b, of course, because we don't know what b is. So that we can solve for b. And you want to remember this is y equals mx plus b. All right, so the y is 1. The m is -2 over 5. The x is 7. And then we don't substitute anything in for the b. Now remember, because this is m times x, you put brackets around the x. Put brackets around the x. You can write 2 over 5 times x, but a lot of the times when people write 2 over 5 times x, they get the multiplication symbol mixed up with the x. So I would suggest putting it in brackets. Now, this is where you want to use either your fraction skills or your calculators. So if you're going to use your fraction skills, what you have to do is multiply -2 over 5 times 7. So when you multiply -2 over 5 times 7, you have to change that 7 into a fraction, so that becomes 7 over 1. And then what you would do is you would multiply the numerators to give you negative 14, and you would multiply your denominators to give you 5. So that would be 1 equals negative 14 over 5 plus b. If you don't want to use your fraction skills, then what you would do is use your calculator. So if you're going to use the fraction button on your calculator, don't leave it as a mixed number, leave it as an improper or proper fraction. All right, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to add 14 over 5 to both sides. And again, you use your fraction skills, or you use your calculator fraction button. So if we're taking 1 plus 14 over 5, so to add fractions, you need a common denominator. So we're going to make this 1 over 1. So to get a common denominator, you're going to multiply this by 5, and you're going to multiply this by 5. So this gives you 5 over 5 plus 14 over 5, which is 19 over 5. So that is your value of b. But if you're a fraction phobe, which some people are, feel free to use your calculator. If you're still not sure how to use your calculator, then just let me know. All right, now that makes your final answer y equals, remember the y and the x stay letters in the equation. The slope and the y-intercept become numbers. So the slope was negative 2 over 5. X stays a letter. And then the y-intercept is 19 over 5.